All right, welcome to Ignite. That's right, we've got some amazing speakers here today, and just as with every Ignite, each speaker is going to get 5 minutes on stage, 20 slides, 15 seconds a slide. These speakers have come from all over the world to speak to you today, and it's going to be a great show. Please welcome up our very next speaker. And actually, though, you're in for a treat here. I've been bugging this woman to translate this amazing story into an Ignite talk for 3 years. And this last spring, she owed me a favor. And thus, you get this talk. Please welcome up Tindy's Julia Grace.
Hello. So this is a story about how the entire computer science community changed during 1 week in August 2010. So let's go back in time. At that period, I was a researcher at the IBM Almaden Research Center in a place far, far away, San Jose, California. Now, at IBM, I wrote a lot of papers, and in those papers were a lot of very complex mathematical proofs, because I like to subject myself to pain. Now, luckily, I had the office down the hall from Ron Fagan. Now, Ron is one of the most famous computer theorists in the world. I'd often go to his office, and we'd talk about a lot of my proofs. Now, in Ron's office, there was a chalkboard. And next to the chalkboard, with a lot of the proofs, were bills and checks. And on every single one of those bills and checks was written, if it is proved P is equal to NP by a date, then Ron would cash the check. So why are people betting Ron all of this money that P is equal to NP? So this is one of the most fundamental problems in computer science. And it is more than just an abstract math problem. This problem will finally tell us what problems computers can solve and which ones they can't. So P is the set of problems that are very easy for computers to solve. Think about simple math. 5 times 3, 15. We can do that fast, so can computers. But NP is the set of problems that are much harder for computers to solve. Now, it is generally assumed that P does not equal NP. But if P is equal to NP, and these sets of numbers are the same, then the world as we know it will be very different. Modern cryptography could be broken very easily, and we would have to come up with a whole body of research in order to solve this. Now, this problem made its mass debut in pop culture in 1995 when it appeared on a Simpsons episode where Homer was trying to escape being around his in-laws, so he went through a door that went into another dimension. Now, there's more than just fame on the line here. There's $1 million if you can actually prove that P is not equal to NP. Now, it's important to note that this problem has been around for a very long time. This is apparently what people did on computers in 1971, and this is when the problem first came out. Now, if you're a computer scientist, you know that it takes a long time for people to solve problems like this. But this changed on August 6th, 2010. A researcher from HP Labs came out with a proof. He sent it to all the scientists working on the problem, including Ron, but he also posted it online to Scribd. Now, a few days later, aggregators like Slashdot and Hacker News picked up on this. Nerds all over the world were going crazy. Somebody had finally proved it. So I wanted to know, what did Ron think? What did all those professional computer scientists working on this think? So I go to Ron's office, and he's eating a sandwich. Not this sandwich, but a similar sandwich. And he says to me, Julia, things like this take time. The proof was 100 pages. And I said, Ron, Twitter does not have time. And then he looks at me perplexed and says, but how did you know about this problem? So by then, something happened that had never happened before. TechCrunch published real news. And suddenly, they were talking about P is equal to NP. Again, something that had never occurred. So did he prove it? So the answer is maybe, but probably not. So like all things in math and science, he still believes the proof holds, but the general community believes the proof does not hold. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that suddenly, all of these discussions that used to go on in private email groups, they're now happening out in the open. And then suddenly, The New York Times picks up on it as well. And researchers like Ron and other people in his community start issuing public statements as the New York Times comes knocking on their door. And they say things like, "We know this is a very hard problem and a very interesting problem, but we didn't think anybody really cared." So the beautiful thing that happened here is that suddenly a community that's used to talking about things in private comes crashing into modern day Twitter, social media, blogs, and we all can learn about the awesomeness that is some of these very hard computer science problems. And so maybe the future millionaire is in the audience tonight. Go out and solve P equals NP. And now Brad is coming on stage.
I'm going to talk a bit about how medical devices are going to change the way healthcare is delivered in the world over the next 5 years. It's going to allow people and empower them to have a more active role in their healthcare. It's kind of like Fitbit Plus or something like that. So no longer are we going to have to worry about the safety and efficacy of devices that we have to interact with in our lives. That thing on the left that you attached to your body and it supposedly broke down fat off your body while you slept, or the fluoroscopy device on the other image there where it used us for shoe sizing. Or do-it-yourself kits, like this gentleman here in China for 11 years did dialysis at home because he did not have access to medical devices. So he actually figured out how to do this at 1/10 the cost from his garage. Fascinating story. But we want to move beyond that now and empower people with real safe and accessible medical devices. Patient-centered healthcare is where we're moving. But really, this is a bi-directional flow of information between you as the patient and your doctor. This will be facilitated by medical devices that are developed or already on the market that you could purchase now or within the next year to make it better. Here's an example of a 14-year-old kid who developed a stethoscope with a 3D printer earlier last year. Now, this allows you to actually digitize the sounds of your heart. Why does that matter? Well, there's usually a lub-dub, but if there's a lub-dub-dub, what we call the S3 in medicine, that's actually the earliest predictor of congestive heart failure you can have. So no longer do you have to measure weights, and if you start gaining weight, call your provider and say, I'm gaining weight. Now you can actually use this on your own from your house and communicate that data, and then your provider can increase your diuretics to lower your weight, which will lower the cost of healthcare and keep you out of the hospital. So this is a very simple device, but it's very powerful. CellScope's another device that came out in the last year and a half. This is a device that allows you to look at the eardrum of your child at home. Fever, earache, where do you go? You go to the ER, right, or the urgent care center. Now you can look at it at the comfort of your own home. It's actually a lot more powerful than that, because not only can you get the information and interpret yourself, you could send that data to an ENT doctor who can look at the data and say, yes, it's red. And they can potentially prescribe medication. There are 5 million visits in the US alone for acute otitis media, ear infections, and 10 million prescriptions. Imagine if the number of visits we could decrease by using telemedicine for this one simple problem that we deal with. So AliveCor gets a lot of press. You may have heard about this. It's a single EKG casing that sits on the back of your smartphone. It can detect abnormal rhythms such as atrial fibrillation. Really important because that has relevance in the context of stroke. So this device actually creates this data set that can be sent to the cloud. And initially, they had a website where providers can go on and see the data. So you can interact with your physician remotely about what's actually going on with the rhythm of your heart. And now those are being integrated with electronic medical records. The cost is already cheaper than traditional devices that you would have to purchase if there's a question whether you had an irregular heartbeat. It's $225. You can actually get that diagnosis made. And by the way, you own it, so you can continually use that device down the road. Microfluidics, you're going to be hearing a lot about this in the next 5 years. It's essentially a microscope on a chip. It's got a lot of plumbing on the chip, but it allows you to do cheap, fast, point-of-care diagnostics. Now, that's traditionally facing towards hospital care, but you're going to be able to do it from the comfort of your own home. Q is coming out with a device that will allow you to test for 5 different markers from the comfort of your own home. That information will be Bluetooth to your phone, where you can make changes on a day-to-day basis based on the changes in that information. Let's do a quick example here. It's December, and you have fever, cough, sore throat. You think you have the flu. You take the test with the device, And that device then Bluetooths and says, you have the flu, yes, notifies your healthcare provider, your physician, that in fact you have the flu. Then that physician orders a prescription for you for that medical problem that is couriered to you somehow by Postmates or something like that, and then it ends up back at the comfort of your home and you actually never left your couch. This is important for a couple reasons. One, physicians really don't want you to come to the hospital with influenza. I mean, we don't mind seeing you, but the problem is that we don't want you infecting everyone else in the room, and that's the problem with influenza. So ultrasound diagnostics are changing in terms of the form factors, are becoming much smaller. And now we're getting a lot of auto-diagnostic devices in the market. So this will allow this to actually be things that consumers can purchase to keep them from out of the hospital or going to see their healthcare provider and still communicate the same amount of data. So at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is create a set of medical devices that you, as the consumer, as the patient, can be empowered to increase your communication with your healthcare provider, to move it back to a cottage industry where you actually have a physical relationship with your provider and you can actually talk with them. So medical devices will help facilitate that process. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Adrian. I'm from Guatemala. I'm the co-founder of a mobile development studio, and also I work at a university part-time. I'm very curious, and I believe curiosity is something natural for human beings. We are naturally inquisitive. That's me. A few years ago, about to experience a flow of electrons passing through my body for the first time. As it turns out, you get a tingling sensation. Well, I found out, experiment. Have you ever seen something and wonder, can I make that, or can I make it better? The world around us is made by us. It didn't just exist. We made it. It's shaped by us. I believe making is natural for everyone. Maybe you have made some food, some art, grew a beautiful garden. In my case, I like technology very much because I think it's a huge leverage. It lets you build a lot with very little resources. That's why this is a tale of making. I've been teaching computer science courses since I was a 20-year-old, and usually ask my students, who taught you to ride a bike? Answers include mom, dad. Then I ask them, do they use a blackboard? They didn't. We learned it by doing. And there's a sense of pride in making, even if it's something as simple as blinking an LED. That's the hardware version of the whole world. The first time you make this, you're going to feel like, I am Prometheus. I wanted that for as much people as I can reach. So in 2012, I started a lab at Galileo University in Guatemala. I wanted for our engineering school students to be makers. We started with workshops on Arduino and Raspberry Pi, and soon the projects arose. That's a 3D printed claw controlled by the Leap Motion, built using JavaScript. Yes, you can build robots using JavaScript thanks to libraries like Johnny 5. Robotics is no longer only for PhD researchers. Any web developer can be a robotic maker right away. That's another project using the Oculus Rift. It's a telepresence robot. It uses webcams as its eyes. You can see the video remotely using the headset. When you are making, you don't need to know exactly what you're doing or why you're doing it. You just need to tinker, play with the technology, push it to the edge, and push yourself to the edge to see what you're capable of. Starting this wasn't easy. There were like 5 Arduinos and 100 students willing to be makers. But in time, the workshops proved their worthiness, and we got some funding. Also, we get more goals for reach. So we started a program called Engineering Kickstart to get high school students interested in technology. It's a boot camp during 3 weeks. We show them how cool it is being an engineer. Also, we're working with children. Sometimes prototyping boards and soldering irons doesn't fit. So you can make Play-Doh right in your kitchen. A salty recipe conducts electricity really well, and a sweet recipe is resistant to electric currents. Put that together, and you got a circuit. Also, we started a Notebots community in Guatemala. A community is open for everyone. So we got students from high school, from different universities, working side by side with seasoned developers. This is not rocket science. Well, sometimes it is. That's a no rocket, built using plastic bottles and a Raspberry Pi. We built it last month at a conference, and it flew like an angel. Surprisingly, it also landed very well. This is not a recipe. We are just learning how to do this. This is a work in progress. We started with workshops, then built some crazy ideas as projects to get some attention, and now we're working on Reach. The world is inviting us to play, to roll up our sleeves and make something. Being makers is something that it's natural for us. This is passionate-based learning. With making, you can explore different possibilities and see what drives you. What do you really like? Starting is not easy. Making needs a lot of persistence, but it's for everyone. So go ahead and make something. If you have mastered a technique, share it at your local makerspace or online. If you're an educator, these are exciting times because you can be a maker of makers. That's my email and my Twitter. We can use it to follow the conversation. I want to finish saying, let's go and make something together. Thank you.
So a couple years ago, my mom dropped this photo album, family photo album, into my lap, basically. And it was a collection of photos that my great-grandfather Walter took when he was in World War I in the German Army. And I fell in love with it immediately. It's an incredible collection. It's got hundreds of photos in it. I mean, I think that this is just fantastic. I mean, it's got these great photos of people like sledding, and he's basically brought his camera all around with him. And I wanted to preserve it. My family basically put me in charge of preserving it and keeping it in good stead and sharing it with the world. So I started to think about some of my experience with photography. I've been very interested in photography for many years. I took a lot of courses in college about photography, and I had a real favorite, which was a two-part course on the history of photography, taught by Linda Benedict Jones. And Linda she's a real expert in fine art photography. She basically started the Polaroid collection and curated it for many years, and now she's the curator of the photography department at the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh. So I was reminded of a lot of the things that we talked about in Linda's class, a lot of the photos that we looked at, and I decided I should call Linda up and see what she had to say about how to preserve it and how best to get it, the artistic community interested in it. Unfortunately, that was a little bit of a dead end. Linda said that the museum is mostly interested in preserving the works of fine artists, well-known artists, and nobody had ever heard of Walter before. But I still felt that it really sort of needed to belong in a museum at some point. But at the same time, I thought, I'll take a different direction. I'm an internet guy. What can I do with these photos now? So I started digitizing them and sharing them online. I took photos of all the pages and made sure that they made sense in a Flickr album. And then I looked for a new target audience. And I decided if I can't get in touch with the artists yet, let's get in touch with the history people who are going to be very much interested in this. And I put it on Reddit, and they loved it. They tore the whole album apart. They made extensive detailed notes on almost every photo in the whole album, like 700 photos. They found all these locations and places that Walter had been, and I actually went to this cathedral in northern France and retook his photo. And Walter had a really interesting approach to these types of how he took photos, and how you could see in that last photo there, he was taking images inside these cathedrals where the roof was blown out, basically. And I decided that the thing to do was to make a reproduction of Walter's album so that you could see the context of the war and the context of all the photos together. And what I did was I went to Kickstarter and I kept what Linda, kept Linda's artistic community in mind and kept the idea of like making a really high quality album in mind. I set the goal pretty high because I wanted to do justice for Walter's photos, make a really excellent reproduction. And it turns out that Kickstarter isn't just a crowdfunding platform, it's a reputation platform too. And that's where I built Walter's reputation as an artist as well as an historical value, basically. And I wound up getting in touch with a lot of people through the Kickstarter who reached out to me. I did an interview with the Daily Mail at like 4 o'clock in the morning on like the second day of this Kickstarter, because people are watching Kickstarter, trying to find out what these new things are, and trying to find out about the next big thing that's coming out. So when I made, the project doubled its goal, raised $113,000, and I drove directly into making the album as like an art object in itself, making it as beautiful as possible. Used really thick paper, nice printing, and in January, everyone received their books. And they were just totally surprised. They were not expecting this history book to be so nice. And I took a page out of How to Win Friends and Influence People, one of my favorite books, where I basically kept Linda in touch about, up to date on what the project was doing, and I asked her for a small favor to write the foreword for the book. And when I finished, when it was printed, I sent her a copy as a thank you. And all that hard work paid off, because Linda called me up a couple days later and said, can we put Walter's photos in the museum? So here they are. Beginning of this month, here they are in the museum of Carnegie Museum of Art, and they did a beautiful job setting it up. And now Walter's photos are put in a context of a real artist, where he is recognized now. And right down that hallway on the left is one of Monet's paintings of water lilies. Thank you.
Our next speaker was here, actually, our next speaker spoke at the very first Ignite, and he was at last year's Ignite I/O, where he talked about better living through Bluetooth. I think this talk would be called Better Living Through Kickstarter, or this segment. Please welcome up Seattle's Dan Shapiro.
Thank you, Brady. So when I graduated college, I told my friend Kevin, I have an engineering degree. If I go to work for a software company, put a bullet in my head, put me out of my misery. I want to make things. Fortunately, he didn't listen. And after 15.5 years building software, I decided last year to take a breather, take a leave of absence over the summer, and spend some time with the family. Well, I don't write code. I'm a product guy. I do a little bit. But it's always amazed me that the most modern programming languages are still backwards compatible with the VT100 terminal. Like, where else is ASCII the state of the art? I always thought, shouldn't there be a way that programming could be more expressive? I had this idea running around my head. At the same time, my 4-year-olds were getting into games, and I was faced with the unpleasant decision between the Candyland school of completely random luck and the tic-tac-toe school of trying to throw the game and hope your kids don't notice. And I wanted something better. So I thought, okay, what is going to entertain 4-year-olds? Computer science. I had this notion, kind of half-baked. They were going to play code cards and write a program. I was going to be the computer. I was going to run the program. And thus was born Robot Turtles out of a PowerPoint deck and art supplies. My kids loved it. The first time we played, my daughter said, "Daddy, I don't like the walls." I said, "What should we do about it?" She said, "Lasers." So it went like this with my collaborators, developing the game. At the same time, I was talking with a crazy friend of mine who wanted to put his family album on Kickstarter. We would chat every night via Skype. Of course, this project was completely doomed to fail. But I learned a lot from our conversations. We talked about what I call the curly rule, for those of you who've seen City Slickers. It's that Kickstarters, great Kickstarters, are about one thing. One thing you want to exist in the world. And when people want that thing to exist with you, they succeed. We talked about what I think of as the platonic ideal of Kickstarters and how to find it, which is you back a whole bunch of stuff, and then you look for the common threads, the platonic ideal of those successful campaigns. Platonic ideal, Vitruvian Kickstarter. So for example, great communications, regular updates, having a story around what you do. And we were talking about all this, and I got kind of jealous. I decided I wanted to do a Kickstarter myself. So I decided to get a designer first. I found this guy in Indonesia. He was amazing. I was up till 3 a.m. every morning polishing the art for Robot Turtles. Then I had to figure out manufacturing, which an exhausting process. I Googled board game manufacturers and called everybody who came up. Wound up with a century-old company called Delano Services, who did an amazing job printing it. Had to figure out shipping. Amazon's cheapest for domestic. Did you know that it costs $72 to send 3 pounds of cardboard to Tauranga, New Zealand? So having got all that sorted out, I had to set a goal. The key for me was figuring out what was the number I would be happy with. I set it at 25,000, which I thought I could probably hit, and I'd lose money, but at least I'd have some leftovers, but at least I'd have something to give away at school auctions for the rest of my life. So I put it up for 25,000. But how to let people find out? I'm not proud of this. I've emailed 3,003 people in my life, and I emailed every single one of them to tell them about the Kickstarter campaign. 3 told me never to email them again, and then something crazy happened. The project fully funded in the first 5 hours. A day later, it hit $100,000. It went on to be the most backed board game in Kickstarter history. People ask me how this happened. The best thing I can explain is that this was something people wanted to exist. This was something, board game programming, for a board game that teaches programming to preschoolers that wasn't out there. I talked to a friend in the board game industry. She said, computer programming is too esoteric. People don't want games that require grown-ups. They want games where the kids can go and entertain themselves in the corners by themselves. Well, my Kickstarter backers did want this, and they brought it into existence. So I listened to them. I resigned my awesome job at Google and spent the next few months delivering to 65 countries 3 semi-truck loads of cardboard, 36 tons shipped around the world. I got outreach from amazing board game manufacturers and partnered with a company called ThinkFun, one of the best in educational board games, whose CEO actually was the brother of Dennis Ritchie, the guy who wrote the programming book I learned from. And you can now find it on Amazon. Next week, it'll be in Target stores nationwide. And would you believe it? A board game about computer programming was on the front page of the New York Times. This thing needed to exist. Thank you. And it was only by putting it out there that I found that out. So I think I was onto something back when I was in college. It's really cool to build things in software, but making something you can hold in your hands that the world wants that you can share with them, there's some real magic there. Thank you very much.
Ready? Hi, my name is Arturo Jamaica. I'm from Mexico, and I want to talk to you how I hack and stop a 9.3 million fraud of Mexico. So I live in a city named Querétaro. That is 2 hours Mexico City. Myself, I have been doing software development since the last 10 years. I'm 24 years old. I do a lot of stuff, mobile, backend, integrated with a lot of stuff. And I started a company in Mexico named Brownie, which the logo is a cupcake, but never mind, where we usually do apps for clients, like for a lot of people. We work 12 people. I am the biggest guy in the company. We all are college students. We don't have any funding, and we're working. One day I get to the newspaper, the most important newspaper in my country, and I read this. Congressman paid $9.3 million in order to get an app. For me, it was like crazy because I manage every month to work with my students and pay the bills that I have to do to run my company. This was compared like 2,100 Angry Birds if you want to make the game with the same amount of money. So I was really angry. I was really thinking about, I was losing a big deal that we can make cheaper. So it was like someone putting me a knife in my back and telling me your country doesn't want you to do software for them because they wanted to pass it to another people because all our country, our business on Mexico is based on corruption. So there was this idea of one guy to tear it down. So we decided to make the app totally free using a contest. So what I do first is I basically hacked the Congress website in order to scrap it and get out all the information that they need and tell everyone to use it freely so we can open information. This was done in March of 2010. Then I released on the day of my birthday, which instead of celebrating, I code the app in 3 days in order to give it away and give it open source to everyone that can handle it. So you can use this app for learning or for find every guy. They make a contest in order to clean their hands and don't to see very bad about the press. And I got an iPad and 1,000 Ks. But for me, it was very significant because I get attention of a lot of people because it was a bigger news that some guys of college, I was 23 years old then, hacked the idea. We also get in TechCrunch and all of fancy sites about news. So that came along for us, very good advertisement in order to find another people. This wasn't done just by me, also was done by another people in Mexico, and also a lot of my team that put work on this. We don't charge a thing. We also make on the top applications on the Android and iOS device, and it's all built in Google technology. So that was I hacked the Congress and saved a lot of money to my country, and this is my contact stuff. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Brian Eshby, and I'm a top contributor in the Google Webmaster Help Forum. This is my 6th Google I/O, and I'm always amazed by the number of developers who aren't familiar with the Google product forums or with the top contributor program. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. When I say Google product forums, I'm actually just talking about the groups that provide technical support for all of Google's products, and they're available anytime you have problems. That should be one of the absolute first places that you go to get help. So whenever you actually go in the forums itself, you will find different badges. And those badges, the blue badges means that the individual who posts that they're a Google employee. The yellow badge indicates that it's a rising star, somebody who's a rising star in the top contributor program. And then there's the top contributors. This is actually an elite program. It provides, all types of testing opportunities, trusted tester, product knowledge, number of insights. This is actually a question that a first-time developer posted in the Chrome help forum, and it was able to actually cause Google to change the fact page in the Chrome help forum. So personally, I enjoy helping other people. I enjoy meeting with other top contributors, coming out to California to go to Google, going to the Plex, testing out new products, great swag. There are a number of different benefits. This is kind of the road to becoming a TC. First of all, you find a forum that you're interested in, that you have some knowledge about, participate. Normally you're contacted by Google and you'll become a rising star. And then eventually you become a top contributor. And these are some of the top contributors. Believe it or not, Google actually has 250 help forums for 25 products in 30 different languages. And the top contributors are actually the most helpful and best people in the forums in terms of answering questions according to Google. There are actually a number of top contributors who are developers, so I'm not the only one. If you need help with Chrome, Gmail, what have you, there's a number of different people who can help. Top contributors are some of the most helpful and active people in the help forums. They are always providing support and helping to educate and help other users to be the best that they can with whatever product. They're very visible, in this case, in their pajamas visible. Whenever they're not helping other people, you can find top contributors hosting things like Webmaster Help Desk Hangouts, that is a live hangout that's every week. Top contributors are technical. They know the ins and outs of Google products from a technical standpoint, and they're always wanting to help. A lot of times they're actually working on creating additional technical content to help other users with the products. They're knowledgeable. Top contributors are actually trusted Google partners who connect regularly with Google to stay in the know about the latest products and updates. So, pause, sorry. Why should you join? Being a top contributor actually provides you with a number of opportunities to increase your own product technical knowledge, and that's one of the most beneficial things for me is to knowing about what's going to happen before it comes out. You also get to give feedback on Google products, trusted tester opportunities, and that's something that's also really unique. Whenever you're a trusted excuse me, whenever you're a top contributor, you actually team up with a Google Community Manager. So you're constantly in connection with them, you're talking with them, and that's a very unique experience too, because there were years, you know, when people would be like, well, how do I call Google? And I didn't have any idea. So one of the coolest things about it, honestly, too, is you get to help and inspire others. You get to help change the world and make it a better place, if you will. You're actually answering thousands of questions, and people constantly are referring back to these. But honestly, it's a lot of fun. This is actually a picture from our TC Summit that was in Mountain View last October, and Google flies everybody out there from around the world, and it's just a lot of fun. So if you're interested in becoming a top contributor or learning more about the program, contact me. There are other number of top contributors out here, and there are also a number of Googlers. Feel free to ask any of us. Thank you, and have a good day.
I would like to apologize in advance for just how morbid this next talk is, and for the amount of glee that you will see from this adult version of Wednesday. Please welcome up Danielle Leong.
Hi, my name is Danielle, and today I'm going to talk to you about forensic entomology, which is the study of the insects that eat you when you die. I hope none of you are hungry, because it's going to be disgusting. So, quick confession, I have photographic evidence that I have always been a nerd. So here I am, I actually interned at the San Mateo County Mosquito Abatement Lab, and I also went to CSI camp. It was totally a thing, it was fantastic. You all missed out because we're no longer 17. So there was this one time at CSI camp when I was sitting in lecture, and all of a sudden this man comes out of the back room and shoots our professor in the head. We're like, oh my God, do we still have to take the midterm? The answer is yes, we did. But our professor gets up off the ground and says, each one of you has been witness to a crime. How many shots were fired? What did the assailant look like? What race was he? How heavy was he? And out of 200 students, not a single one of us had the same answer as the person next to us. So the moral of this story is that eyewitnesses are incredibly unreliable. I mean, unless you have Neil deGrasse Tyson as your witness, that man's word is God. But you should never, ever rely on witnesses if you want to win your case. So forensic entomology is incredibly important to police work because insects provide physical evidence of time of death. It takes a specific amount of time for an insect to get from egg to larva to pupa to an adult. And since insects don't have stretchy skin as they grow, they molt. Each one of these molts is called an instar. Blowflies, for example, have 3 instars that they go through. And so if you can count how many of each specific type of insect at each specific instar are on a body, you can actually get a pretty accurate time of death. So there are certain things that can affect an insect's life cycle. For example, if the body's in a barrel, if it's wet, if it's hot, if it's cold, all of these things can either slow down or speed up the growth cycle of an insect. Now, there are ways that you can measure this. There are things called body farms, which are super creepy laboratories where scientists can go and measure the effects of these different types of variables. So they're just, bodies in car trunks just kind of hanging out in the field. So the first one was actually in the University of Tennessee. Now, there are 5 stages of decomposition, and each one of them comes with their own insect. The first one is initial decay. This happens immediately when you die. Flies just kind of come out of nowhere. I don't know how they find you, but they find you. They will find you, and they will just start laying eggs in your eyes and in your mouth and any other kind of orifice they can find. And so when those eggs hatch, we're very familiar with maggots. Those are blowfly larvae. And this is also how we get ants. So this is about immediately after death until 3 days after. Next up, we have putrefaction, and this is when the naturally occurring bacteria and digestive enzymes in your gut start to eat away at your organs, and they release carbon dioxide, and they make you start to bloat. This actually happens at initial decay, but this is when you get exceptionally puffy. So we have our maggots. They have gone through several stages of their instars. We also have the appearance of the carrion beetle, as well as the rove beetle. And we also still have ants, because your body is still very soft, so they can chew away at you and take you away. Next up is my favorite stage of all, which is black putrefaction. And this is when your body explodes. And it's black, and it's disgusting, and it smells. And this is when your neighbors find out that you're dead. It's fantastic. It's the best one out there. So remember our blowflies, it takes a specific amount of time from egg to larva. Now we have reached the pupa stage. They're burrowing into the carpet underneath your body. We also have the appearance of the black scavenger fly, as well as our carrion and our rove beetles. Next up, we have butyric fermentation, and this is when your body starts to dry out and it smells like cheese. I hope you're still hungry. And this is because of the butyric acid that your body is producing. So it's about 20 to 50 days after death. And with butyric fermentation, you get the appearance of the cheese fly. And the cheese fly is my favorite fly because if I was a fly, I would be a cheese fly, because then you could live in cheese. And honestly, who doesn't want to do that? And we also have the appearance of our skin beetle, as well as our black scavenger fly as well, and our carrion beetles. Our last stage of decomposition is dry decay. And it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, your body has exploded. There's not a whole lot of fluids. It's dry. It does happen in humid weather, but it's not really that interesting. It's like mites and moths and boring stuff like that. So quick recap. Eyewitnesses are terrible. If you want to win your case, you want to have as much physical evidence as possible. Insects help provide physical evidence of time of death. There are 5 stages of decomposition, and each one of them comes with their own insects, like the cheese fly. Thank you very much.
My goodness, how do you follow a talk like that? 2 weeks ago, I submitted an essay that explained why I wanted to come to Google I/O, because I didn't have a registration code. I explained how I wanted to come and understand how Google products and services would help create what I'm calling the Internet of Natural Things. Next thing I knew, ReadWrite gave me a registration code. So I engaged in a little bit of essay reuse and submitted that essay and said I wanted to explain how Google ought to participate in creating this large-scale, wide-area collection of wireless sensor networks. Okay, it was a little bit presumptuous, but it got me an Ignite presentation. So why are these things interesting? They're interesting because I want to collect sensor data from large remote areas, like watershed-size areas, maybe hundreds or thousands of square miles. Why do I want that data? Hydrologists use that data to, for example, create flood warnings and flood forecasts. Floods are the most deadly natural disaster in this country after heat. And of course, you need that data in a big hurry. Better data, quicker data, means better forecasts, more lives saved, and more property preserved. Also, 80% of our freshwater resources originate in forested areas. In order to protect our natural water, our freshwater resources, we need to understand what's happening in those areas. And of course, climate change compels us. Climate change really drives us to want to better understand these remote areas so that we can better adapt to a changing environment. There is the problem, small problem, of getting the data out of these areas. It's the last tens of miles problem. These areas are areas that don't have common infrastructure, such as cellular service, internet service. They don't even have commercial electrical power. So one solution is use data. Use radios to get these data out, such as the radios that are used in police cars, taxi cabs, and amateur radio operators. These radios, you do have to deploy them, and they're really slow, at least by today's standards. You can get data out at maybe 9.6 kilobits per second. But amateur radio operators are experimenting with other technologies. Throughout the world, hundreds of amateur radio operators have attached a radio and a camera to weather balloons, have released them. They rise to 100,000 feet and take beautiful pictures. At 100,000 feet, when these balloons burst, the sky is black, and you can even see the curvature of the Earth. And of course, since these have radios that are broadcasting the location, the amateurs can chase after them and recover them and get neat pictures. Since the 1960s, other radio amateurs have been creating communication satellites that will allow amateurs to communicate with each other through low Earth orbit satellites. And this has created a worldwide network of amateur radio operators who can provide ground stations, ground support, and manage these satellites. In fact, there's a small satellite from NASA, which isn't an amateur satellite, but it's similar, that is using these same amateur radio operators to collect telemetry for NASA, a low-cost, free ground station. Oh, and by the way, that was a picture of PhoneSat. And you guessed it, its main computer is an Android phone. There's the proof of concept project by NASA. So in order to create these things, in order to create these Internet of Natural Things, we need some collaborations. And Google has just the projects that I think ought to participate. You've all heard of Project Loon. the Balloon Internet Project by Google that will provide internet service to remote areas with high altitude balloons that are circulating the Earth. I'd like for those balloons also to provide internet service to remote sensors, to these remote Internet of Natural Things. And if you've read the newspaper, Google has promised, apparently according to news reports, to invest billions of dollars in a constellation of low Earth orbit satellites that will also provide internet service. I think that Google ought to use these satellites to connect my networks in remote areas to provide internet service so we can get those hydrologic data quicker from more remote areas. And it's not just hydrologists that want these data. Meteorologists want it, researchers want it, and I think Google wants it. After all, Google, according to press reports, has recently entered into an agreement where they will make climate change available over the web. What better place to deliver this sensor data? And collaborations are required to create this project, to wire the internet and to wire the planet. And I think the particularly interesting collaborations are, I think that the Google, if I might say presumptuously, I would like to say Google Project Loon and the LEO satellites collaborate with amateur radio operators. Amateur radio operators get new toys to play with, and Google gets free ground station services throughout the globe that will provide them telemetry and management services. And of course, not only will this project wire the planet and save the Earth, it's also part of my dissertation research. And so maybe it will help me graduate too. Thank you.
We're down to our last two speakers, and this next speaker is what I would call a web theorist. Please welcome up Kevin Marks.
So in ancient Greece, there was a road called the Way of Miracles that went from Athens to Eleusis, where people would go there to get to the holy places in Greece. And on that road was a man called Procrustes, who would get people to stay in his bed at night, except that if they didn't fit, he'd cut off their feet or stretch them out on the rack to make them fit. And my point is that we tend to do this in computing quite a lot too. If you're younger than me, you may not remember, but we used to have to use file names like this and compress every thought we had into 8.3 characters, and the 3 were predefined by the app, so we really had 8. But things get better over time. Now, in RuneScape, you can have things that are worth up to 2.147 billion gold coins because they used a Java long to store the amount of gold coins something could be worth. If you have a database of customers that has zip codes in it, you may wonder why you have so many used in Beverly Hills and Schenectady. Because you ask every customer to fill in a zip code, but there seems to be more there than the population would predict. Because these are the zip codes people use when they're lying to you, or they don't have a zip code because they come from another country. And so you're by forcing them to put something in the database, you're forcing them to make something up and destroy your data. Another example here, this is a database that's asking you for your gender, and the programmer clearly wanted to use 1 bit and then said, oh, okay, you can be other or decline to state if you really insist. This is a problem because gender isn't 1 bit. It's more of an essay question for a lot of people. There's this site called GenderFork, which is explicitly about people discussing gender and how they feel about it and how it makes them interact with others. And it's very hard to fit that into 1 bit. So databases are part of the problem. I don't need to recite this cartoon, you've all seen it. But databases, by their very nature, force us to think of the world as data, not as the world itself. But we put the databases first. Object orientation can be bad too. If you build something that inherits, you end up having volcanoes that have fax numbers because it seemed logical that places had fax numbers. So it's very hard to get this modeling right. XML was an attempt to do better, to let you construct arbitrary documents that contained other things, but they kept the Procrustean thing by making it draconian. So if you made a mistake, that was it. The processing would stop and you had to throw it out. Whereas HTML was very accepting of errors and let you produce large documents with anything in it, took over the web, and XML is sort of petering out on the sidelines. But what this meant was you then had to try and make sense of these HTML, which is where we got the idea of big data. But it's not really about big data. It's about messy data. It's about data that is produced by people as text, as representations, as things that don't actually fit into the databases. So what do? We come up with techniques like MapReduce, where you take all this messy data on the left and squeeze it through the Procrustean map, and then shuffle it and end up with a database on the right, which looks nice and orderly, but in fact, you've applied that Procrustean process on the way in. This is a well-known list of things that people get wrong about names. Really won't fit into an Ignite, but there are many of them there. And then what you do is you MapReduce, write a MapReduce to try and find what real names are across the web, which is how we end up with Google Plus NimWars, where the rule is not, this has to be your name, this has to be a name that fits the algorithm that thinks it's a name. And that's another example of this sort of Procrustean squeezing the world into space. The biggest problem, though, is plausibility of stories. We tend to construct stories and prefer the stories and then retell them over time, which is another Procrustean trap for ourselves, because Procrustes never existed. But yet this 3,000-year-old story about a guy who cuts people's feet off on the road between Athens and Eleusis is so compelling that I'm still using it as a metaphor 3,000 years later, and people have been doing this for all that time. So the real challenge is, if we're going to build standards and databases, remember that they're documentation, not legislation. Make sure that you can actually reproducibly prove and show you're working why you're doing what you're doing. Document an empirical process. And these are a couple of the standards that I've worked on that try really hard to document every piece of the process along the way and have an empirical way of deciding what to use. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming out. I hope to see you again next year. Do an Ignite in your hometown. Thank you. I'm Brady.